Bryan and Lynn. So Bryan is with the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program. He's an extension associate and also an adjunct professor at Cornell in the School of Integrated Plant Science. His research and extension programs aim to improve management of weeds while minimizing the associated environmental, economic, and human health risks. His responsibilities include weed management in all agricultural crops and community settings in New York. He's been with us for how many years now? 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Time flies, and he earned his PhD at the University of Maine. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
That'll be in the next one.
Okay, whoever this Bryan Brown guy is, he sounds like a goober. Anyways, happy to be here. Great lunch. This is an awesome venue. It feels more like a wedding reception. I'm gonna start singing. Is there? Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so Aaron asked me to talk about some of my projects with weed seed bank management. Okay, so just as a brief outline, I'm gonna talk about two different things really: how to prevent seeds from entering your soil, and then how to deal with the seeds that are already in your soil. So two distinct parts. First off, I have to admit, I just love the look of a nice clean field. Nothing prettier to my eye. And weed seed bank management can help us get there, help us achieve that. A few years ago, I took soil samples from a bunch of different farms, brought them back to a greenhouse, watered them to encourage germination. And this is what happens. You get a very wide array of different weed seed banks, so the number of seeds and then the type of species in the soil. And in talking with the farmers, it turned out that the farmers on the left really only controlled weeds just enough to avoid a yield loss, whereas the farmers on the right really tried to prevent weed seed production. Oops, that slide wasn't supposed to be in there. And one of the farmers who had a very high weed seed bank, end of the season, his farm often looks like this. And he only controls weeds using early season hoeing. He thinks, rightly so, that the weeds that come in later in the season, August, even September, they're not going to affect yield as much. So why control them? Well, a lot of times, unfortunately, they do delay his harvest, and of course, they set seed. On the other end of the spectrum, one of the farmers with a very clean seed bank relied on a full season of hoeing. So throughout the season, every 10 days or so, he would come through and cultivate, and he finds that every year he has to weed less than he did the year before because the seed bank is getting depleted, so there's fewer weeds coming up, and so it's getting easier for him. A look at the actual the numbers. And you can see the weed seed bank, that the number of seeds in a given area was 10 times as great for the farm that only used early season hoeing compared to the full season. Organic matter may have been affected, unfortunately, likely by all the frequent tillage. Farm size here in acres and related to the number of full-time employees. And it's kind of ironic because early season hoeing, they needed more employees, and he felt like, he felt like weeding is such an extensive task. I only have enough labor to really focus on that early season. But he actually required more employees than the farm that does more weeding, and that's because there's fewer weeds emerging. So I actually implemented each of these strategies in addition to a couple others in onions, and recorded the weed seed production at the end of the season. And so the others were plastic mulch and hay mulch. And yeah, there was a clear, huge amount of weed seed production from when you're only controlling those early season weeds. And this is what the plots look like where we were only controlling the weeds for, let's see, up until mid-July. So this is like early September. This is, about 2 months of weeds growing uncontrolled compared to the rest of the field, which is basically, decent control offered by the mulches or more regular hoeing. And we came back the next season, and you could clearly see where those plots were. There were 10 times as many weeds emerging in those plots where they went to seed the year before compared to the surrounding areas. Okay, another example of some trials looking at weed seed bank management. So this is water hemp, which if you don't have water hemp, you don't want to get water hemp. It's resistant to a few different herbicides, as Lynn will talk about later probably. This is a project with Mike Hunter, Jeff Miller, Venancio Fernandez, and Mike Stanyard. We did several field days in farmer fields that have water hemp. Don't worry, we made everybody wash their shoes and their boots after they left the field. We don't want to spread this thing. I don't have any on me right now. So yeah, in implementing these field days, we had some projects in soybeans. If you want to take a picture, go ahead. I don't know if you could maybe catch this, but all the results in the soybeans are here, and the corn trials are here. It's all online. And we did a number of pre-only, post-only, and pre and post weed control programs, and control ranged from 0% with no applications all the way up to 100%. So we were really thrilled. We were able to get 100% control, but the costs really increase as you go down the line here. But I think for some of these really challenging to control weeds, it can actually be worth it to spend the money to get close to 100% control. You could get by with, just Callisto, $26 per acre. Okay, not bad. This is just an estimate of the cost. And get decent control. Probably avoid a yield loss. But because those 10-20% that survive are going to be producing thousands of seeds, it's going to be more of a problem in the future. We actually did some modeling based on our results, and based on the number of seeds they produce and the percentage that emerge every year, we modeled, okay, so the water hemp gets to this farm at year 0 or 1 year. It slowly builds up in its population, then it kind of explodes. At that point, the farmer notices and would ideally change their management to more effective controls. If they're able to get up to 95% control, it's still not enough to keep the population from growing. You need 98% control of it to keep it at a steady level, and you need more than 98% to deplete it in the weed seed bank. And so because of this, and because of how challenging it is to control water hemp and some of these other herbicide-resistant weeds, it can cause you to do some crazy things. And this is me trying to control the late season water hemp with a weed whacker. And this is before it set seed, so there's no seed. It's just flowering at this point. We're going to pull all these out of the field. But there's a number of other options to control the escapes that you don't want setting seed. You don't want that seed spilling down into your soil. Okay, hand roguing, if you have any local high school kids that want to make some bucks and go out in the field there, pull those weeds off and burn them. 1965, isn't it? You can mow the tops. If you've got a low-growing crop, you can come over the top and mow it. You spray topping with something like paraquat in some crops, like late-season soybeans. You can use to prevent the flowering weeds from setting viable seed. Electrical weed control, Lynn has done more work on than I have, and she might mention that. But can actually prevent late season weeds from or reduce the amount of viable seed they can produce. Mowing or tilling, just sacrifice those patches that are really bad. If you've got a part of the field that's awful, just sacrifice, just mow and fill that in, and not worry about trying to harvest the small amount of crop that's trying to compete with those weeds. Separating the seeds at harvest is mostly for field crops. So an example of that is a chaff cart, which you've got your grain going on and into the bins or the hoppers, and then chaff gets separated out. This is more commonly done in Australia, and they'll just burn these rows. In the US, we're starting to get some better equipment to handle weed seeds, like this Harrington seed destructor, which is integrated into the combine. It's basically a mill, so the seeds get separated out, and then it pulverizes any weed seeds that are in it. And it's pretty darn effective. It's not 100% effective, and it's only working on the seeds that are retained on the plant. So things like horseweed, where the seed blows off, maybe during harvest or before harvest, it's not going to work on. But this is an example of some of the pulverized chaff, and it seemed to do a good job here. But I think that was promotional from the company. What keeps happening here? So prevention is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is my only picture of Palmer amaranth, which is another one. If you don't have it, you don't want to get it. There's a few counties in New York that have it. I'm sorry, Lynn, this is my only picture with it. And yeah, if you don't have it, really do everything you can to keep it out of your farm, and be especially careful of used equipment that Lynn might mention later. Anytime there's soil sticking to the equipment, assume there's seeds in the soil. Combines can hold a huge amount of biomass, including weed seeds. One little study found that a combine that looked clean, everybody, the farmer thought it was clean, looked pretty good. They actually found 150 pounds of biomass, in every little nook and cranny. And there's great videos online about how to clean out a combine, which is a great practice to do, especially if you're going from farm to farm or field to field, where you might have a weedy field and a pretty clean field. You don't want to contaminate the clean field. Inputs like crop seed can be another source of contamination. With large seeded crops like corn and soybeans, those are pretty darn clean. Smaller seeded crops and some of the cover crops, you can get some contamination. There is a New York State seed testing service you can send samples to, and they'll tell you exactly what seeds are in it, if there's any contamination, what species those are. They identify the seeds somehow with a microscope. I can't do that, but so grower safe seed, you've got to be a little bit careful, because it can be difficult to sift out similar size weed seeds. So wild radish kind of articulates into these little pods that are very similar to the size of some grains. And I really like to see when growers prevent seeds or weeds on the edges of fields from kind of tipping over and depositing all their seeds into the field, so it just gets spread around through tillage. So spraying or mowing or keeping a tilt border, I think, is a great practice. Okay, I've been talking fast. Part 2, how to deal with the weed seeds that are already in your soil. Okay, so firstly, related to tillage, based on what type of tillage or what type of tool you're using, it does very different things to the weed seeds. With a moldboard plow, you're taking those seeds at the top of the soil. So assuming you had say you had a disaster year and all the weed seeds, they just fall right down on top of the surface. Everything starts right here. With the mold plow, you're sending those 8-10 inches deep. And for the most part, there's some exceptions, but for the most part, weed seeds like to germinate in the top 1 or maybe 2 inches. Okay, so these probably don't have to worry about these unless you mold board again, and then they'll come right back up to the surface. So you kind of only have that trick once. Chisel plowing doesn't do anything great for weed seed management, but no-till, I think a few of us have mentioned this today, no-till can be good because it leaves the seeds right on the soil surface. They're more apt to germinate the following year, so you can get a good flush of weed seeds out of your soil and then control them even before you plant. If you can control them and then prepare your beds again with tillage and bed prep, maybe even irrigation, encourage germination, you get another flush, and several flushes, you can really deplete the weed seed bank, and that's called creating a stale seed bed. Heat is another thing. It's I'm just gonna kind of skip over it because it's fairly expensive unless you're on a very small scale. But you can actually kill weed seeds in the soil with heat. And I think this is probably the most important thing. And Sophie mentioned this earlier, that weed seeds. A lot of people think of weed seeds as living forever, and for some species they do live pretty darn long. But for our problem weed species, most of them, they have a half-life. So how long does it take for half of them to die of natural causes? They have a half-life of 1 to 2 years. So after maybe 4 years for some of these horse weeds, pig weeds, if you're not adding new weeds to your soil, new seeds, the seeds that are currently there will die out, or they'll germinate and you'll kill them that way. So to me, that's really good news. Weed seeds do die out. This is on our side, and it is worth it to try to prevent new seeds from being added to your soil, so that it gets easier over time, like that one of those initial farmers that I mentioned. Okay, so Aaron also asked me to talk about seed predation. I haven't done a lot of work with seed predation, but it can be a very beneficial thing for us. Something that can really help us. There's a number of seed predators, beetles, crickets, worms, rodents, some birds. How much of an effect does it have? And Adam Davis, who we'll be hearing from later over Zoom, is much more of an expert in this than me. One of his papers, he found, wow, these seed predators can eat, on average, about 52% of the seeds that fell to the soil surface. So that's pretty good. That's a big help for us. And then this study found the next year, seedling emergence, so the weeds that actually came up, was reduced by 38%. So that takes into account all the other seeds that were in the soil already. So that's still a pretty good effect. Larger seeds tend to be preferred by the larger predators like the mice and birds. And there's a little bit of nuance into which seeds are the best, or which seeds the predators like to eat the most. But my main takeaway from looking into this is that most of the seeds are eaten, and that we don't really need to worry to get into the species differences. The way to really maximize the number of seeds that get eaten is by avoiding post-harvest tillage. So say you at the end of the summer, you've got some weeds that set seed, and those seeds have rained down on the soil surface. Right there, when they're sitting on the soil surface, that's when these beetles and mice and birds, that's when they can see them. If they get tilled in, if they're even a quarter inch under the surface, they don't get eaten. So you got to keep them right on the surface. and avoid post-harvest tillage to encourage germination. You could also do other things like provide habitat refuges, so no-till, hedgerows, grassy drainage ways are areas where these beetles and mice can really proliferate, so that there's a lot of them on the edge of the field, and they'll come into the field to eat the seeds. This is from my earlier study. Guess where the beetles and mice and all the seed predators were by far the most abundant? In this plot right here, compared to the bare soil, or even in the onions, which you think might be enough habitat for them or cover. They like the dense vegetation. Obviously, you don't want to be providing all the seeds, but that's the type of vegetation that they like. Oops. Another thing is, farmers have noted to me that in the wintertime, when the snow's covering around, if they have weeds emerging with seeds still on them, they'll see birds land on these weeds and start pecking away at all the seeds on it. So that can be another potential way to reduce the seeds that enter your soil. I know it's not the prettiest thing to look at over the winter, but it could be helpful for us. Okay, so just to wrap up, it's kind of obvious, but do everything you can to avoid this situation of a weedy mess. Invest in doing the best job you can. Have a good plan for your weed management. A good crop rotation has been talked about. But if you do get a weedy mess, you do get weed seeds dropping down to the soil, maybe leave them there. Encourage seed predation in the late fall. And then those weed seeds will germinate early in the spring, and you can get a good flush of them controlled before you're planting. And then as a final step, you could think about moldboard plowing to send those seeds deep underground where they're not going to be a problem. I want to mention I have a new project doing some more seed bank analyses. I'm looking for 50 farms. I'm going to do analyses of their seed banks and provide tailored management recommendations based on the seeds that you have. So if you're interested in participating in that, there's my contact information. And I don't know, is there time for questions?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to switch pages, so if anyone has a couple questions.
Yeah.
So how deep would you say wheat seeds are in the soil? 8, 10, 12 inches?
That's a good question. So I think just through natural freeze-thaw cycles, I think that there's some seeds will kind of get pulled down over time. I think it also, depending on the depth of your typical tillage, they're gonna probably most of them are going to be in that layer. But
I guess to add to that question, when you're down there, would they remain dormant down there, or just when you said about the half-life?
Yeah. So the question is about, are they dormant underground? And yeah, so all the things that affect germination and all the cues that weed seeds get and all the weathering that happens is in the top few inches. And and it's kind of a gradient. As you go down, the temperature is more stable. There's less freeze-thaw action happening. Most of the soil microbes, the fungi and the bacteria that break down weed seeds are in the top few inches. So all of these things are less the deeper you go. So yeah, the weed seeds are do last longer if they're down deep. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you think back the seed grow in the year before, you said that what you don't want to go down, you usually something with it and you have to do.
Yeah, so you're asking about if you had a lot of weed seeds on your soil from the year before and you want to encourage them to germinate, how do you control them mechanically with tillage? Is that without bringing up more? Yeah, so, there are some shallow tillage tools. You can use, sweeps, 1 inch deep to, aggressively, cultivate that 1 inch there. Yeah, I guess a field cultivator. You could use a chisel plow or, yeah, like a perfecta harrow would be great, but just keep it shallow to avoid bringing up new weed seeds. Yeah. I think you asked about organic method, so herbicides or the organic option would be flame weeding would be the best for doing no soil disturbance, but also controlling those weeds.
New York State of want to ban plain weed.
Thank you, Brian.